At the very moment Jesus exhaled his final breath, something shifted, something far beyond what the human mind could comprehend. The air grew thick, charged with an unseen energy, a force beyond reason, beyond science, beyond explanation. Then it happened. The earth trembled, not a mere quake, not just shifting soil, but a response, a reaction from creation itself, as if the world, in mourning, could no longer contain its grief. And those who were there, the believers, the skeptics, the soldiers hardened by war, felt it. Something greater than them, something far beyond human understanding, was unfolding before their very eyes. Because this was not just the death of a man. This was an event that sent shock waves through both the spiritual and physical realms, an event so powerful that it ripped through the veil between the seen and the unseen, and the mysteries that followed. They defied all logic. They shattered the boundaries of reality itself. Today, we unravel the 5 most astonishing events that followed the crucifixion of Jesus. Events shrouded in mystery, events so profound that they continue to echo through time, but beyond the history, beyond the scriptures, beyond what we've been told. We must ask ourselves, what do these events truly mean? Do they hold secrets that have been lost across the centuries? Could they reveal a deeper truth, one that reshapes everything we know about life, death, and what lies beyond? This is not just a story. This is a revelation. Stay with me as we pull back the veil and uncover the hidden truths behind these unbelievable events. Because once you see what happened next, there is no going back. At the very moment Jesus took his final breath, the earth reacted. A violent tremor tore through the land. The ground shattered. The rocks split apart. And the very foundations of the world seemed to scream. This was not just an ordinary earthquake. The Gospel of Matthew records that as Jesus died, the earth shook with a force that sent fear into the hearts of those who witnessed it. But this wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a message to those who doubted, a message to those who condemned him, a message to the world that something unimaginable had just taken place. Throughout history, great civilizations have believed that nature itself could respond to monumental spiritual events. In Roman mythology, earthquakes were often seen as signs of divine wrath, warnings from the gods that something had gone terribly wrong. In Jewish traditions, earthly disturbances were linked to divine encounters. Mount Sinai trembled when God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. The walls of Jericho crumbled after Joshua's army circled the city. But what happened at Jesus' death was unlike anything before. This was not a mere tremor. It was not just another earthquake. It was timed with precision. The very second Jesus cried out, "It is finished," the earth reacted, as if creation itself was mourning the death of its creator. For centuries, many have wondered, was this earthquake a sign of divine judgment? The Old Testament speaks of earthquakes as a weapon of divine intervention. When God spoke, the mountains quaked. When his presence descended, the earth could not stand still. So what did this earthquake mean? Was it a heavenly warning to those who had crucified Jesus? Was it a signal that something far greater was at play? Or was it something even more profound? Science or supernatural? Some historians argue that Judea, where this took place, lies near a seismic fault line. Could this have been a natural earthquake? Maybe. But here's the question. Why did it happen at that exact moment? Why did it coincide so perfectly with the death of Jesus? And most mysteriously, why did it cause the tombs of the dead to break open? Could this be evidence that this was not just a natural event, but something far greater? And that brings us to the second event, an event even more unbelievable, to be continued. It was an event unlike any other in human history. The sky had darkened, the earth had trembled. The very fabric of reality seemed to shudder in response to what had just taken place. And then, The tombs opened. Yes, you heard that right. According to Matthew 27:52-53, at the very moment Jesus took his last breath, certain holy people, believers who had died long before, rose from their graves and walked among the living in Jerusalem. Can you imagine it? You're standing in the bustling streets of Jerusalem. The air is heavy with the aftermath of the earthquake. Fear grips the city like an unseen force. And then, out of the shadowed burial sites, figures begin to emerge, their faces ancient, their eyes unfamiliar, their presence unmistakable. They are the dead returned to the world of the living. Some believe they were the great prophets of old, perhaps Isaiah, Jeremiah, or even Elijah, figures who had long since passed but whose legacies endured. Others claim they were martyrs, men and women who had died defending their faith, now granted a brief return to testify to a truth beyond comprehension. But one thing is undeniable. This was no ordinary resurrection. Unlike Jesus, who rose with a glorified, immortal body, these saints seem to return only for a fleeting moment, appearing before many, then fading back into the unknown. Throughout history, the idea of the dead rising has been associated with judgment and reckoning. The book of Daniel speaks of a day when many who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. The book of Revelation describes the moment when the sea will give up its dead, and death and Hades will deliver the souls they hold. Was this moment in Jerusalem a glimpse into the future? A warning that all graves would one day open? A sign that what Jesus had just accomplished had forever shattered the chains of death? Some may dismiss it as symbolism. Others may call it a supernatural mystery too great to comprehend. But what if it was something more? A message etched into the fabric of reality that death had just been defeated. For thousands of years, humanity had feared the grave. But now, as these resurrected saints appeared among the living, a new truth was revealed. Through Jesus, death itself had lost its power. And while these saints disappeared back into the unknown, the real mystery remains. If the dead walked once, could it happen again? And if so, are we ready? The execution was nearly complete. Jesus, nailed to the cross, hung between life and death. The crowd watched, some mocking, others mourning. And then, something unnatural happened. The sun, which had been burning brightly at noon, began to fade. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground, and then total darkness. For 3 long hours, from noon to 3 p.m., the sky over Jerusalem was swallowed by an unexplainable blackness. This was not an eclipse. Solar eclipses don't last for hours, so what could have caused this? Throughout history, darkness was seen as a message from the divine, a warning, an omen, or the signal of a cosmic shift. In Roman culture, an unexplainable darkened sky was a bad omen, a sign that the gods had withdrawn their favor. In Jewish tradition, darkness was a symbol of divine judgment. The 9th plague in Egypt, 3 days of thick, oppressive darkness, preceded the final judgment on Pharaoh. This was not a mere atmospheric phenomenon. It was a cosmic declaration. Could this have been God's final warning to those who rejected Jesus? Or was it something even greater? There is another way to see this moment, not as judgment, but as grief. The very earth itself seemed to mourn the death of Christ. Imagine standing there. The sun vanishes at midday. The air feels heavy. The weight of an unseen force presses against you. Some fell to their knees, others stood in terror. Had the universe itself reacted to the death of its creator? One Roman historian, Thallus, reportedly documented a strange, unexplained darkness over Judea at this time. Why would a secular historian mention this event unless something truly happened? Skeptics dismiss it. But that only raises a question. If even those who did not believe in Jesus recorded this event, what does that mean for us today? Here's where things get even stranger. Centuries before this moment, the prophet Amos wrote something chilling. "In that day, declares the Lord God, I will make the sun go down at noon and darken the earth in broad daylight." Amos 8:9. Coincidence? Or was this a prophecy fulfilled in real time before the eyes of those who stood at the foot of the cross? Some dismissed it as chance. Others saw it as a warning. But a few began to wake up to the truth. This darkness was not just a terrifying event. It was a message to the world, and for those who had eyes to see, it changed everything. The battlefield had hardened him. The screams of dying men were nothing new. The sight of blood, the stench of death. These were just another day's work. He was a Roman centurion, a warrior of the empire, trained to obey, trained to kill, trained to feel nothing. But on this day, something changed. This was not like the thousands of executions he had presided over. This was different. As he stood beneath the cross, the very ground trembled beneath his feet. The sky, once clear, was now swallowed by an unnatural darkness. The air grew thick with a presence he could not explain. And then he heard it. A voice, weak but unyielding. A man, broken but unbowed. "It is finished." And in that moment, something inside the centurion broke. His heart, once as cold as the steel of his sword, felt the weight of a truth he could not ignore. His lips parted. His voice, once used to command men to death, now trembled with a realization that shook him to his core. Truly, this was the Son of God. He was a soldier of Rome, a man of authority. His duty was to execute orders without question, to uphold the law of the empire. And yet, here he was, proclaiming that the man he had just put to death was no mere criminal. This was more than a mistake. This was treason. By Roman law, the only divine ruler was Caesar. To acknowledge another as the Son of God? That was a death sentence. And yet, he could not deny what he had seen, what he had felt. For in that moment, the soldier who had known only blood and war had come face to face with something far greater than Rome's power, something even stronger than death itself. What made this battle-hardened soldier abandon everything he had known? What caused him to utter the most dangerous words of his life? Perhaps it was the way Jesus endured the pain, without begging, without rage. No man endured crucifixion like this. Even hardened criminals, men who had taken lives without remorse, would scream, curse, plead for their lives. But not this man. He bore the torment in silence, as though he carried a burden far greater than just the weight of the cross. Or perhaps it was his words spoken not in anger but in forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Who does that? Who, in their dying moments, prays for those driving nails into their flesh? Or maybe it was the very forces of nature that responded to his final breath. The earthquake, the sky turning black at midday, the temple veil splitting from top to bottom as if an unseen hand had torn it apart. This was not just another crucifixion. Something far greater had happened here, and the centurion knew it. What became of this man? The Bible leaves his fate unknown, but legends whisper of a story not yet forgotten. Some say his name was Longinus, that he left behind the sword and shield of Rome, and instead took up the banner of Christ, that he traveled, proclaiming the truth of what he had seen, that he died not as a warrior of Rome, but as a witness to the greatest event in human history. Did it happen? We may never know. But one thing is certain. Even the most hardened skeptic, even a man trained to kill without question, could not deny what he had seen that day, because some truths are simply undeniable, and the moment Jesus died, The world changed forever, and so did the heart of a soldier who had seen it all until that day. There are events that shake history, and then there are events that shatter reality itself. At the very moment Jesus took his last breath, something unthinkable happened. Inside the great Jewish temple in Jerusalem, in the very heart of its sacred chambers, hung a veil unlike any other. 60 feet high, 4 inches thick, a barrier so imposing that no ordinary force could rip it apart. This was no ordinary curtain. It was the dividing line between humanity and the divine, separating the Holy of Holies, the place where God himself was believed to dwell. Only one man, the high priest, could enter, and even then, only once a year. No exceptions, no mistakes, no direct access to God until that moment. Because when Jesus cried out, "It is finished," something shook the very foundation of the spiritual world. The veil was torn, not from the bottom, as if by human hands, but from the top, as if by God himself. This was no coincidence. This was a supernatural interruption. For centuries, this curtain represented separation. Separation between God and man. Separation between the holy and the unholy. Separation between mortals and the divine. But when it was torn, it sent a message louder than words. The barrier was gone. The old way was over. The sacrifice had been made, once and for all. No more blood offerings, no more endless rituals, no more distant, unreachable God. Because Jesus had become the bridge. No longer would people need priests to stand between them and God. No longer would a veil separate heaven from earth. For the first time in history, access was open to all. But here's the chilling part. The temple priests, the very ones who upheld these sacred traditions, must have seen it happen. Imagine their shock. One moment they are preserving the old ways, upholding centuries of tradition. The next moment, the very foundation of their beliefs are ripped apart before their eyes. Did they understand what they were witnessing? Did they realize that this was no accident, but rather the sign of a new era? Some say they ignored it. Others say they were terrified, knowing that what they had once called blasphemy was, in fact, the truth. Because from that moment forward, the world was never the same again. The tearing of the temple curtain was not just an act of destruction. It was an act of liberation, a declaration that the old system was over, that the divine was no longer locked away, it was among the people, and that the greatest barrier of all, the one between life and death, was about to be shattered forever. Because what happened next would change history more than anything before it, and it all began with the ripping of a veil. 2,000 years have passed, yet these events remain a mystery. The earth shook, the dead walked, the sky turned black, and a hardened Roman centurion, a man trained to follow orders without question, stood before the crucified Jesus and declared, "Truly, this was the Son of God." But why? If this was just another execution, why did nature itself react? If this was just a story, why do even non-Christian sources record these events? And if Jesus was just a man, why did so many witness his return just days later? These are not mere coincidences. They are signposts pointing to a greater truth, because if Jesus really defeated death, then everything changes. Think about it. We live in a world obsessed with immortality, with unlocking the secrets of life and death. From ancient alchemists searching for the elixir of life to modern scientists pushing the limits of human longevity, humanity has always been driven by the same question: what comes after? And yet, over 2,000 years ago, one man claimed to know the answer. He didn't just preach it. He didn't just teach it. He lived it. And then, he proved it. If this is true, then it means death is not the end. It means there is a reality beyond what we can see. And it means that everything we think we know about existence, power, and the afterlife must be reconsidered. So the real question is not whether these events happened. The real question is, what will you do with this truth? The story does not end here. It is still unfolding, and it is waiting for you to discover it. Dare to question, dare to seek, because the answers have been hidden in plain sight all along. The veil has been lifted. The events that followed Jesus' death were not mere coincidences. They were messages written across time, etched into history, and whispered through the ages. An earthquake that shattered the ground beneath those who witnessed it. A darkness that silenced the heavens as if creation itself mourned. Tombs that split open, releasing those long thought lost to the sands of time. A hardened soldier who saw, understood, and declared the unthinkable. These are not just stories. They are signs. Signs that challenge everything we know about life, death, and what lies beyond. And now, the question is no longer what happened, but why it happened. If this has stirred something within you, if you feel the pull of something greater, something ancient, something waiting to be discovered, don't ignore it, because the greatest truths are not found in the open. They are hidden in plain sight, and only those who seek will find. This is just the beginning. Subscribe to Path to the Unknown and join the search for answers that have been buried, forgotten, or concealed. Because history has secrets, FAITH holds mysteries, and the unknown is calling. Until next time, stay curious, stay searching, and never stop questioning.